Okay, Nippon, one of the things that complements the IQ framework, the IQ engagement, is actually understanding at a very deeper level, much, much deeper than just asking a question, but understanding how open questions or closed questions or well thought out questions or poorly thought out questions frame and shape the way you influence a conversation. So I've developed a very, very simple tool that helps people doing the IQ listening process or the IQ engagement board. I've created 6 simple icons to help improve the conversation or engagement process. So if you like, I just run through them quickly, or if you want to start with the question, I'm happy to take your question first.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. So the first part that makes a conversation important, particularly in the area of risk assessment, is to not carry an agenda into the conversation. If you carry an agenda into the conversation, such as, I want to change the behavior of this person, or I have a judgment about this person, or I have a judgment about the task they're undertaking, or I want to shape the safety outcome. If that's the agenda you take in, that will shape your conversation unconsciously with that person. Now, you may be aware of it, but the other person smells it like they smell a stench that comes into a room. So the first stage of an effective conversation is to suspend your agenda and not think of what you want to say next. Now, the reason why that's hard for people is most people come into agenda with a purpose of what they want to achieve. It's very hard for them to suspend that. And the word suspension is very important. It doesn't say get rid of your agenda. It doesn't say absolve your agenda. It doesn't say have no agenda. It simply says put it on hold for the moment. You can come back to it later, but you must not start off a conversation with your purpose. What you have to do is extract from the other person their purpose. If the conversation is driven by your purpose, then all of your biases and all of your subjectivities will shape the conversation. So the first stage of an effective way of influencing people with language is to suspend your agenda. And that's a skill which I teach, which helps people, and anyone can teach, helps people to make sure that whatever follows is an open conversation that is driven by the agenda of the other person, not by the agenda of the person driving the conversation. Now, traditionally in risk and safety, the agenda has driven by telling and lecturing the other person on how to behave. Now, we know from all the research that that actually doesn't work. So that's the first one. Now, the next one is making sure that the pitch is at the right level so the other person can catch it. So very simply, if I'm speaking to someone who is a low level of literacy, who is not an academic, then I have to speak in such a way that I don't sound like an academic, and I use language which is pitched at their level. Now, that's not condescending, but let me tell you a simple story. I have a 5-year-old who's now living with me in my house. My granddaughter is currently living with me. If I speak to her like a 69-year-old, it is a complete and utter waste of time. I have to speak to her in the ways in which she can listen. And so I change my language so she can listen. And that's exactly what pitching is. So if I'm talking to a seafarer, I have to speak like a seafarer. If I'm talking to a concreter, I have to speak like a concreter. And if that means I swear a little bit, well, guess what? I'll swear a little bit. If I'm speaking to the chief executive, I speak a little differently. So my pitch is leveled so the message can be caught. And too often people have an agenda and they pitch at the wrong level. You know, if I'm pitching at a 13-year-old young girl, I'm currently coaching a basketball team of 8 13-year-old girls. And I've got to tell you, I have to start thinking like a 13-year-old. The other day, they all came to training and they had these AirPods in their ears, right? To come to training. But what's the point? I've got to talk to them and help them get those earpods out so that they can listen. But so my pitch has to pitch at a 13-year-old so I can get them to listen and get to the outcome. If I lecture them like a 69-year-old adult, you know what they do? They switch off. They switch off. So suspending agenda and pitching is important. Then the next one is the frame. How do you frame your language? So what do you put in the frame and what do you leave out? And what you leave out's very important, but we can talk about that later. The other thing that's important is probably the most important thing in sport, which is reframing. So someone comes to you and says, I'm sick to death of all these idiots. They do all the wrong things. They never follow the rules. I hate being a safety person because they don't do what they're told, right? And so what I say to that safety person is I reframe it. Okay, so are you telling me that you're caught in a difficult position and what you're currently doing doesn't work? And they say, yes. Oh, good. So I get the reframing and I say, good. So what would you like to do? Not what would I like you to do, because I've suspended my agenda. What would you like to achieve? And by reframing what they say from a negative, it's everyone else's fault, to a positive, what would you like to achieve? That reframing reshapes the whole conversation. It now pushes away from everyone I'm blaming to now, what's your strategy? So that's what framing's about. Then priming is, what words do you use to make your message stick? Okay, to make it stick. And stickability is what marketers do and what people in advertising do really well. They know how to pitch. And so if I'm in McDonald's or Kentucky Fried Chicken, or I'm with Nike, or I'm advertising something, they know exactly how to prime their audience, how to make something stick. Now, in leadership and risk and safety, you can only really make something stick if you know what the agenda is of the other person. And so you can't prime people unless the other person. Now, I've got a paintbrush here. See, it's an image of a paintbrush. If I want to make the paint stick to a wall, I have to sand it down first before I can do my painting. Otherwise, it won't stick. It'll all fall off. That's the same with psychological priming. I have to know the other person, develop a relationship, and so I lay down the foundation for what follows, and that way my message sticks. Now, mirroring comes from neuro-linguistic programming. We have to be very careful with that because it can have an unethical outcome. But mirroring is making sure that the way I look, the text I use, the words and the symbols I use are reflected in the world of the other person. So if they wear a suit, I wear a suit. If they wear a high-vis vest, I wear a high-vis vest. If they swear a little bit, I swear a little bit, because mirroring is about connection. And so they won't think I understand their world unless I sound and look like them. So, you know, sometimes I go to these people on a construction site and my greatest disadvantage is I have no tattoos. Now, my son, he's got tattoos from his wrist to all over his body and his back. He does his shirt up and you can't see it. But when he walks onto a building site, you know what he does? The first thing he does, he rolls up his sleeve. And you know what you know? Well, no tattoos on my arm, but the moment he rolls up his sleeves, people listen to him because they know he's in their group. So I don't have the tattoos, so I've got to replicate them by the way I look and the text and the words and the symbols I use, because I don't have tattoos. So mirroring is very, very important, to mirror the language and the symbols of the other person. Then finally is anchoring. So these 6 essentials are the absolute essentials of communication, messaging, and the way we connect with people. You know, in the whole of the risk and safety world, I've never seen anyone present these 6 things, but they are absolutely essential for IQ engagement. So the last one, anchoring, is how do you make your message hold? So you've had a conversation, you've connected to the person, you've framed the right message, your pitch is good, you've primed them with something that sticks, and you've mirrored how they are, so you look and sound like them. Finally, how do you make it anchor? How do you make it stick? Often that's done through repetition, or it's done through asking them to participate in what's going on so they take control. Now, one of the hard things for people in leadership and risk and safety is they have this temptation to control. One of the most successful things in this approach to influencing is you actually give control to the other person. And that's the final part of anchoring. And it's very, very scary for people, but you'll get fantastic results in leadership and risk if you actually trust the other person, you throw it to them and say, okay, why don't you tell me what you want to do? Not what I want to do, what you think you want to do. And so they're the 6 key concepts of language influencing. And that's a brief snapshot, Nippon, of what is underneath IQ engagement. When you learn IQ engagement, that's stage 1. When you go to stage 2, you really need to develop these 6 skills so you can improve and help people better engage with the risks and the leadership they want to develop.
Brilliant.
I know I've gone absolutely mad because I know we've only got a few
No,
minutes.
no,
So what do you think of that?
Yeah, so I think you touched upon it, and I think the one of the things I would like to say is that yes, beautiful tools, but they can easily be turned into instrument of control and manipulation.
Oh, yes.
Um, and one of the things I think about is that there are instances, Rob, when you meet somebody and you meet them online. You haven't met them in person ever. You have
Yes.
not done anything except just showing yourself up in a
Yep.
completely different set of clothes and
Yep.
doing things that are completely opposite to everything that we have discussed. And yet,
Yeah.
even before you say hello, you click with the other person. You
Yes.
really connect with the other person.
Yes.
I'm just thinking, how does this fit with this idea of what folks will say, Thomas Folks will say, interconnectivity, interaffectivity,
Yep.
intercorporeality, and so
Yep.
on? Because I think a lot of that actually happens much before a person even resonates with you.
Yes, it does. That's true. That's very true. And look, I think you've raised an issue behind all of this, which is the person who engages with someone else needs to consider their ethical and moral motive. I think you can use these 6 things in the wrong way. And this kind of stuff you're looking at on the screen now is also taught to people who are salespeople and who are marketing people. And their motive is to get a sale or to sell a product. So we have to be very ethical and moral about the way we use these 6 skills. But at the base of these 6 skills are those things you just spoke about. How do we connect? How do we engage? How do we message better? But you have to do it in a moral, ethical way, because I think manipulating another person is very different than seeking to influence, particularly in a way, see, because I use the word influence in a recognition of the subjectivity of engagement. So I engage with you, and here we are speaking on opposite sides of the world. I know that the words I say and even the frame of where I'm situated will influence you. And it's just a consciousness about that. That's all, being consciously aware that it's going on. There's nothing more insane and more naive than to think that what people see has no influence upon them. So even the fact that you have a painting on the wall and a board behind you, like I have a board behind me, carries an influence. So the purpose of these 6 things is all wrapped in the idea that we have an ethical and moral responsibility to the people we engage. Yes, we have skills, but they can't be separated from many, many unconscious things that are happening at the same time.
Wonderful, wonderful. There was a very interesting news this morning about a company that is involved in doing some major projects in the Middle East, and as a result of that, well, the government of that particular country wants to go ahead with that big project or mega project,
Yep.
and has decided to sentence 3 people to death, three poor people to death, because that is coming in their way. Their agenda is coming in the way.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, as I'm listening to you, Rob, that where is the ethics and where is the moral values in pursuing such an agenda? No, and these are companies with all the ESG certification,
Yep.
everything ticked off, and so I find it very disturbing actually that
Yep.
that everything you say that you do is so different from everything that you do. And
Yep.
the frustrating bit is that people still don't get it, still don't get it. Yeah.
No, and look, Nip and I don't actually waste any time on people who are in that space, and it doesn't matter whether it's the political world, or whether it's the world of work, or whether it's the world of leadership. If people are in this space where they don't want to learn, they don't want to go beyond the basic kind of black and white world, if they don't want to go to a level of wisdom and sophistication, I actually don't give them any time.
No,
It's
no,
just, it's simply not worth it.
no. And the first point you made about suspending the agenda, I think there's something to explore there, because um, I think it's very hard for most people to suspend an agenda, because they genuinely believe that, or unconsciously, what happens is that once you listen to the other person, something happens to you. And
Yes,
that something is very dangerous for most people, that my
yes,
opinion, my view, my agenda might change. And that's what
yes,
we're most scared of. I don't want
yes,
to lose perspective. I don't want to lose my agenda. So I'll do
yes,
everything to preserve that agenda, even if that means
yes.
manipulation and control. And I think
Well,
so.
control. A lot of people are very afraid when they give control to another person. Very scary.
And this is the remarkable thing I've seen, Rob, with many people who have either had a given birth to a disabled child, or have had a very failed
Yes.
relationship, or
Yep.
someone passed away in their family, or some uncertainty has just hit on their face. And you
Yes.
find these people a lot more open and
Yes.
empathetic to
Yes.
this kind of that I'm happy to lose control, because they have experienced themselves losing control of the situation.
Yes.
They
Yes.
had this. I had a near collision at sea, and one of the things that struck me was that I actually went into very negative kind of a spiral for many years because of that collision, because I was made to believe I was the cause of that accident. The captain genuinely believed that, and
Yep.
the whole ship, the attitude of the ship changed about me, and so it's just going into the negative spiral is very discomforting. But when you look
Oh,
back at it, that dissonance actually brings so much to your life. And
yes.
I think at that time we don't realize it, that keeping an open mind, and as you very rightly say, suffering is so important to learning,
Yep.
because if you
Yes.
don't suffer, then you don't learn. So we
No.
need to embrace this dissonance, this discomfort, which I think is integral to learning. So I think just
You know,
coming back to the idea of, sorry.
the funny thing about safety, Nippon, is the whole industry is about the avoidance of harm. And yet the foundation of learning is we learn from when we're harmed.
When we suffer,
What a,
yeah,
what a
absolutely.
crazy idea. What a crazy idea that we are run away from the very things that teach us and help us learn. Crazy,
So true.
crazy.
Yeah, I will stop. But this has been such a good reminder. I mean, very basic things, but often forgotten. And I think if you recollect every time you've had a good conversation with somebody, unconsciously you have followed that pattern all the time.
Yeah, correct.
You have
Correct.
some of the best conversations you have are with taxi drivers, or when you go on a haircut. Why?
I know.
Have you ever asked
Amazing.
yourself why? Yeah, because you don't have
Yeah.
an agenda there. You
Yeah,
just there to
correct.
have a conversation. And I think for
Correct.
most people, and I hear this all the time, yes, that's a great thing. I can have a great conversation with the taxi driver, or my hairdresser, but I
Yeah.
cannot replicate it to my organization, because there are people who would learn about my vulnerabilities and take advantage of it, which
Yep.
is
Yep.
fascinating.
It is fascinating. Yeah.